How are you doing, my fellow cat game enjoyers? It's the day you've been waiting for. Since the release of the last tier list, which I can't really call a tier list anymore, I've been getting a ton of feedback from everyone in the comment section, and let me just make this loud and clear before we get into the tier list. What you're watching right now is a serious tier list video, and unlike last time, I will properly explain the strength and weaknesses of every uber rare that I rank in the tier list across each stage of the game, so that you know exactly how good each unit is regardless of their final rankings. Due to the length of this video, I will try to rank the most popular units first, which are probably what you're looking for anyway, so watch out for your own ubers. Alright, let's get started. Here we have the version 12.3 tier list maker for all the ubers and legend rares. And let me just say that we are not gonna rank any collab units today, so if you're looking for those, make sure to leave a comment below on which units that you would like to see. But one special exception here, and that is the living legend himself. I mean, he's just too powerful to live up in the meta tier, right? Like, he's breaking the game. So yeah, we only have 5 tiers in the middle because I think any more in between tiers are completely unnecessary. Let's start with our dear Amaterasu here, straight up in the S tier. She is just a really good generalist. Now, as I promised at the start of the video, I'm going to be ranking them on all stages of the game. So here we have Amaterasu in early game. Absolute beast. I mean, massive damage versus all traits. Like, where do you even get that outside of Vest exclusives? Luckily, we do have a regular uber in the Almighty's collection, which is of course our Amaterasu here. Absolute beast in early game, mid game, and end game, even surpassing our boy Gao here. Where is he? Here he is. Gao also belongs in the S tier. I would say he's very borderline S tier. Now, I know I would trigger a lot of people by saying he's A tier because, I mean, Gao is just straight up S tier in early game and mid game, right? Well, you see he kind of falls off late game with all of the recent additions. I mean, 7.5k DPS isn't really all that much at level 30. The only thing that he has going for him is range, which now here's the thing that's special about Phono. You see, before he was introduced into the game, you have your standard super long range snipers like Aphrodite and Saki, but they could only target 1 or 2 traits with 15k DPS versus their own target traits. But here, Phono just breaks that barrier by having massive damage versus all traits while still keeping that 1000 max range. That is just ridiculous. Okay, you're not gonna get that kind of stat anywhere else in the game. I mean, just think about Professor A, one of the most dreaded enemies in late game. I mean, there's a few units who can actually reach him, or rather outrange him for the sake. And Phono here is just gonna be rolling every Professor A you encounter with absolute efficiency at 24k DPS at level 30. Having just said that, Phono does hold his crown for being the only unit in the game with that much range and that much DPS, okay? That is not gonna be surpassed for a very long time. And without the need to say, he is an absolute beast, just like Amaterasu and Gao in early game and mid game. Well, just think of him as a cat cannon, will you? A cat cannon fired every 7 seconds with more damage versus traded. Like, how can you even beat that? That's just wiping the entire level, kind of power level that he has in his hands. So Phono stays solidly in the meta tier. I did not say he is the best unit, no, but he does have something that none other units have in the entire game, which is why he sits at the meta throne. Well, that was a lot of generalists we just ranked. Let's go for Aphrodite. Aphrodite used to be the star before the arrival of Phono. She was in the S tier solely because of her domination in range. Now, with the existence of Phono, I'm afraid that Aphrodite must go down to A tier. Okay, very sad news, I know. Unless she get double targeting in her super talents, she is only gonna be A tier. I mean, 3k DPS at 800 range, that is pretty impressive, but not impressive enough to be in the S tier. Okay, just barely below Amaterasu, who happens to have Zombie Killer as a talent, which is one of the main reasons why she's there, okay? She has both massive damage and Zombie Killer. That is just a deadly combo. Alright, moving on. Let's get another Uber which has super long range. Let's just rank Saki right now. So Saki is one of the interesting Ubers who got a really good additional talent in the last update. I mean, what was Phono thinking? Like, they just randomly gave her a strong up talent, and that changed a lot, okay? I mean, she's able to target 2 targets, and that is what separates her from Aphrodite here, who is only able to target 1 target, and having similar DPS with slightly more LD range. I say Saki sits in the S tier, above Amaterasu as of version 12.3. Let's go for Kai. Kai is, without a doubt, one of the best anti-floating tankers. And did you know she also has a shield piercing talent? Now before version 12, Kai used to be one of the best anti-Aku units actually. And should I say before the introduction of Lillian's true form, which is just an absolute mad counter to Aku enemies. But before that, Kai used to be the one who gets the job done. So if she had resistant versus Aku talent, ooh, that would make her very, very powerful. But nevertheless, with a lot of HP, knockback resistance, and resistant versus floating, she sits very solidly at S tier. I mean, as long as you can get her close to any floating enemy, then she can basically stay there and not move. And that includes the White Cyclone. Okay, now we just mentioned Lillian, didn't we? Let's rank Lillian next. So, being the queen of Aku, she really sits at the S tier. Okay, she is not to be used as an ace angel attacker. She is solely designed to pierce shields with absolute efficiency, with 100% shield piercing and a guaranteed surge that can go up to 900 range away if I remember correctly. I mean, let's have a look at the other shield piercers. The only other shield piercing unit with 100% chance here is the Dancer of Grief, and is a jack of all trades. He has 100% shield piercing, he has all the immunities in the world, but the performance is a little shabby. Now, he is a very interesting unit again. If you're able to get him next to a Behemoth, then he will just invalidate that shield immediately. But other than that, I mean, as a zombie killer unit, he is not that effective. As a general DPS, he is not that effective unless he's put against traitless enemies. So I'm gonna put him in the A tier here, but know that if you're in the Aku realms and you do have him, make sure to use him, as he is one of the 2 main shield breakers in the game. He is gonna carry you through Aku realms pretty hard, especially at the boss fights where the bosses have huge HP shields. just there tanking your unit's attacks. And on an additional note, for those of you who are in the early game, Aphrodite and Saki, these long range snipers, are not gonna be so easy to use, okay? They're not gonna be as brain dead as Is or Akai here. I mean, they're just straight up HP plus attack combo, like. And Litten here is actually a good source of DPS, only in her true form. Okay, she is also very mediocre before her true form, so she is only gonna be good once you get her true form, which is probably gonna happen somewhere in the late mid game or just late game in general. Okay, let's rank Lucifer now. Lucifer is another sniper, and unlike the other snipers, he's actually kind of useful in early game because he targets both Aku and floating. Now, floating enemies that you encounter in early game are mostly eyebrows and what are those called again? Mooth. Yes, enemies with mid 300 to 400 range. These kind of enemies are what Lucifer can easily outrange. Therefore, with his strong against ability, he's actually quite a viable sniper. You can use him to cheat stages like Craze Wall and Manic Eraser even by stacking him up before the boss comes out of the base. So I'm gonna put him in the A tier actually. He does have a pretty disappointing true form, I know. But I'm gonna give you the credit here, Lucifer, for having that massive range, being a sniper who targets 2 types, which is pretty niche actually. So yeah, before true form, you kind of have to rely on the RNG, but after true form, he is a solid source of long range DPS, especially against enemies with over 500 range. That includes both Legrim and Professor A. So yeah, there you have it, a pretty solid sniper, or backliner should you call it. And while we're at it, let's just rank one more anti-Aku. With the introduction of his true form, Heavy Jack has risen to the top of the anti-Aku Uber list, and he sits solidly above Lucifer even. Now I can't exactly promote him to the S tier yet because, like other Dragon Emperors, he is pretty expensive and doesn't have an OP cooldown. So but other than that, he is very solid. I mean, he's got 50% shield piercing as well as resistance versus Aku and Red. And he's got a pool of 600k HP against his targets, which are almost as high as Hades. So yeah, he is a very viable tank and shield piercer in the Aku realms as well as Uncanny Legends if you're up to that stage. But in early game, he's gonna be used mainly against red enemies as a tank. I mean, his DPS is not particularly outstanding, but he does have range, so he's gonna be a ranged war player. Okay, now it's time to correct a mistake I made last time. Let's rank Cat Machine somewhere. Cat Machine attacks extremely slowly, so he almost never attacks. But he does have that speed and wave blocking ability, so I'm gonna put him in the B tier because, well, despite his inability in the offense section, he is pretty capable defensive wise. Like, he does have enough HP to tank just like Heavy Jack, and he has a decent DPS if he does manage to get his attack off. Think of him as a filibuster with more speed and more HP and can tank. That's the best way I can describe him really. So in early game, he's gonna be pretty useful if you use him into the future, but that is if you don't have better units such as any of the Pixies would easily outdo Cat Machine in the tanking area as well as the offensive area. And next up is our Forsaken hero Bora. Now last time I put him in the A tier because, let's be honest, his DPS as a generalist is not that impressive in late game. But I did say that I will only be looking at what he's good at. He is not to be used as a generalist, but rather a specialist. Then that's why I believe I did wrong him. So here I'm gonna correct the mistake and put him in the S tier. I mean, he is just an absolute beast against aliens. I mean, he can two-shot most alien bosses given the correct cat combos as well as the strengthened up talent. But overall, he just dominates pretty much any alien that doesn't have over 400 range. He is all you need for Heavenly Tower floor 17. Despite the menacing looking aliens, he will absolutely teach him a lesson and bring them home. To the stars, of course. Let's just rank some more pixies while we're at it. Lumina is extremely powerful, as I've demonstrated in the ITF final boss solo run video that I posted many months ago. But here we're not ranking legends just yet, so we're gonna be ranking the rest of the Pixie series, which are all really good. Now first up is Air. Air still belongs relatively low in the tier list because of how many competition there are in the anti-alien field. I am thinking about whether he should belong in the B or C tier. You see, in early game he's not gonna be of much use because he is a barrier breaker and he does have long range, but the DPS is not so great. So if you decide to invest into his talents, he does have a weakened talent, which I guess can be pretty handy. Think of him as a Lumina, but instead has long range. B tier or C tier? I'm gonna put him in the B tier because long range debuffing aliens, that sounds pretty neat when you have an enemy like Alpaca, which does have a lot of range and is able to snipe your units from far away, especially when he is strengthened. Okay, that llama is not to be messed with. And the Gravolodon, oh, he belongs solidly in the A tier. Yeah, similar to Heavy Jack, he is very good at tanking aliens. Okay, Matt Shea beat Alien Citadel top floor with just him and Surfer Cat. So yeah, that goes to show how powerful Gravolodon is. Gravi also has a wave attack which helps him to reach backliners like Alpaca, as I just mentioned, and wave immunity actually. So he is a very solid offensive and defensive option when it comes to aliens. Again, probably S tier in early game when you're just beating ITF. He can straight up tank most of the bosses, including Raging Bahamut, for quite a long period of time. So yeah, you probably want to use him a lot in ITF and COTC. Alright, we're gonna rank one more Pixies, and this is gonna be a crossover between Alien and Aku. Now, does he belong in the A tier? Let's find out. So in early game, you're not gonna be able to acquire his true form, which does gain in a unique wave shield ability. Now that alone sets Yaminora apart from the rest. He is in fact, in my opinion, the best wave shield in the game. See, the only other range wave shield option you have is the unit from the Evangelion series, and that unit has 400 range if I remember correctly. So Yaminora here having less range actually increases his chance of blocking all of the wave attacks generated by the enemy, because each wave is about 200 pixels long. Other than that, it's a very mid tank for Aku enemies. Do not try to tank Aku Gori with Yaminora. He will collapse before you know it, okay? Don't even use him as a viable debuffer. He is just not that good offensively or defensively, apart from being a really good wave shield, with a really good cooldown, of course, coming from the Pixies family. So yeah, only acquire his true form if you need a wave blocker. He is like your go-to wave blocker here. Having 350 range, he is standing at the perfect position to block all waves whilst being durable. Okay, what did I say about popular units? Let's just quickly rank some of the most popular units right now. Here we have Darsley. Needless to say, she is sitting at the meta tier. Absolutely meta in early game, mid game, and late game. There is no doubt about that. What I have to add though is that the recent enemies seem to be getting surge immunity for some reason. It's almost as if the game is trying to nerf Darsley. I mean, that was a pretty good move by Phonos if they intended so, but hey, she is still sitting rock solid in the meta tier. There is just no other unit with a skill set even similar or close to hers. I mean, with that 22k universal DPS and a surge with 100% curse, there is no surpassing such an incredible offensive capability. Am I right? Following naturally, we have our god of debuff, Mitama here. Now, I made an announcement on my channel just a week ago about how she is potentially being demoted. Now that is completely false news for those of you who are worried. Now, even though the recent enemies are gaining surge immunity, they are not really gaining that much of slow immunity. And speaking of slow immunity, there is one exception recently, of course, and that being the Demon Horse. The Demon Horse is not an enemy that you'll be facing anytime soon if you still haven't beaten Stories of Legend yet, so don't worry about that, because just like Darsley, Mitama is not getting overtaken. In fact, she will probably never be overtaken in her role of debuffing traded enemies unless Zero Legends as a whole imposes slow immunity enemies on her, which is extremely unlikely to happen. But even if that does happen, she is still very powerful offensively. You just heard that right. She is a very good unit offensively. Now let me explain. She has a base DPS of 3000 at around level 30. Now that seems pretty shabby, right? That is until you see she has a whopping 15 knockbacks. And because she has the rebound ability, every time she's hit by a tiny attack, she will get knocked back and then re-attack immediately, which makes her a very good choice of DPS, a very good choice of long range DPS actually. So when you're in a pinch, even if she cannot slow debuff the enemy, she can still deal a ton of damage with, of course, some meat shields keeping the enemies away from her blind spot. Without the need to say, she is amazing in early game, mid game, and late game. So yeah, she stays very much solid in the top 5 spot. Okay, I know it's really tempting to rate this guy right now, but we're just gonna delay that for a moment. We're gonna rank OG Carsley first, because how can we rank Dark Carsley without ranking the OG Carsley? And despite what other people say about her being not as powerful anymore, she sits right on the border between meta and S tier in my opinion. I mean, there are some stages, in fact a lot of stages, where she completely destroys the enemy formation. Now, the only reason why she's in the S tier is because she doesn't have curse immunity. If she does have curse immunity, she will go straight into the meta tier, and I am not having second doubts about that. Okay, she is the only unit capable of creating a surge with knockback versus all traded enemies, and that is an incredibly useful asset in Uncanny Legends, where a ton of really powerful traded enemies come at you head and toes. Just like Dark Carsley, her surge is very useful in early game, mid game, and late game. There is nothing that can stop her apart from traitless bosses and curses made by relic enemies. But she does have a decent range, which allows her to outrange most traded enemies. So you want to be a bit careful to use her against enemies like Loris, who can curse with long range. Okay, and about you. Well, I did say this is gonna be a serious tier list this time. So, you're going at the bottom of A tier. Now for those of you who are new to the game, Dark Mitama here is just a pure traitless debuff build. She's basically Mitama with an extra aspect of weaken, but in trade only versus traitless. Now that alone greatly limits her usage. There's just not that many traitless enemies that needs that level of debuffing that you see nowadays. Dark Mitama is completely ornamental. It's like a decoration in your lineup, you know. If you really want to destroy the stage in style, you bring her along. That's about it, really. And of course, she doesn't work outside of her niche. So in early game, probably very useful in early game because, well, she's designed to debuff traitless enemies in Empire of Cats and Stories of Legend. But into the future, no, she's not usable. COTC, not usable. Uncanny Legends, also not usable. Therefore, she is borderline A tier in late game and A tier in mid game and early game. Okay, it's time to rank some war gods. I just posted a user rank guide and that involves XP farming. So the first war god we're gonna rank is naturally Yukimura. He sits right in the S tier. I mean, his DPS has recently surpassed Bahamut's. Okay, that is some news to the early game players. Now for those of you who are in the early games thinking, how on earth do you raise an 8k DPS space Uber to match the power level of Awakened Bahamut, something with 33k DPS? Well, my answer is, even though his DPS is lower, he also attacks slower, and he does have the rebound ability, which means that every time he gets knocked back, he does re-attack. And because he is faster than Awakened Bahamut and has more health, most of the time when Bahamut fails to do the job, such as versus Professor A, he can actually get in there and get that hit in, which is going to be crucial in late game. And as a matter of fact, at level 60, it is more than your Awakened Bahamut. So that's why you should invest heavily in Yukimura, especially if you're in mid game when you're aiming to cheese stages like XP Colosseum, or even if you're not cheesing the stage, he is a great tool to speed up your completion of the stage, as he can do a lot of damage versus the black enemies. So without a doubt, he is very useful in early game, mid game, and late game. So that's why he's in the S tier. Now next up is gonna be Balrog. Yeah, that 300k swing is just way too deadly to belong in any other tier. I mean, his power rivals that of living legends, don't you reckon? Just watch the floor 40 cheese to get a taste of Balrog's power. And the only one who's missing is Dark Tenyan. Now, Dark Tenyan is again on the border of S tier and meta, but what sets him apart from Kazuya here is that he is a better generalist even when cursed. Okay, curse does not affect his usage. In fact, he has strengthened, which is immune to curse in a game mechanics kind of way, okay? Because curse only takes away targets. And Dark Tenyan targets traitless, but as we've discussed earlier with Dark Mitama, traitless isn't exactly that big of a target in late game and mid game, as a matter of fact, because most stages you're gonna be seeing mixed enemies. So when there is traitless, he absolutely demolishes them, as you would expect with a massive damage Epic Fast Uber. But even when there is no traitless enemies or when he's simply cursed, he still functions as a very good generalist. So that's why he is in the meta tier. He has tons of HP for a rusher, tons of DPS versus all traits, and of course, he crushes traitless enemies. Absolute ace up the sleeve for those of you who are in the early game and mid game section. Okay, moving on, let's rank some more Dragon Emperors. Now last time, I remember putting you in the B tier, but you're gonna stay in the B tier this time. And what has moved up actually is our boy Gladios. Now Gladios, I put him in the C tier last time, okay? I'm sorry for doing that to you. You do not belong in the C tier. You are borderline B and A, okay? Gladios is your go-to unit for Craze Cat stages as well as mainly Cat stages. He is a combination of Tourist Unjagando with way more range. He is one of your most reliable traitless debuffers out there, especially in early game and mid game. Therefore, I would say he is borderline A due to how niche his target is, whereas Doramos here targets Angel with very similar abilities, except there is way too much competition in the Angel target section. Therefore, he is stuck in the B area. So yeah, the niche really does matter here. Now in late game, of course, both of them fall off significantly due to how much they cost and the way better Ubers being available. But of course, if you have no other options, he is still the go-to traitless debuffer, and this guy can just serve as a backup Angel debuffer in case you don't have any other anti-Angel units, which is extremely unlikely when you unlock him. He is an okay debuffer when he's true form, so I'm gonna leave him at the bottom of B tier for now. Alright, let's rank some newer units. So here we have Dahlia-san, and Dahlia-san, you know what, I'm gonna put him in the S tier because he hasn't received his true form yet, okay? This is like a preemptive judgment. This is like, given his true form, he has the potential to be in the S tier. Okay, just look at Saki. Saki is a long-range attacker with ridiculous amounts of DPS for that much range. And the similar situation is here with Dahlia-san, where he targets two traits, is able to both debuff and deal DPS. Okay, he has a 30% chance to do a savage blow, which makes his DPS above 10k. Okay, for a unit with over 500 range, that is extraordinary. I use him against Legrim all the time when I'm missing an attacker. When Darsley doesn't work because Legrim has 480 range, when Barrock doesn't work because, well, Legrim one-shots most of your units, he is your source of DPS against the backliners of the enemy's composition. In early game, he's probably not gonna shine as much. In mid game and late game, oh, he is gonna do his job. Now, I don't know about end game, but hey, here in late game, he is doing his job pretty well. He is like in the limbo between A and S tier right now. Depending on what kind of true form he gets, he may or may not be promoted or demoted, but for now, I'm seeing him as a very good prospect here, so he's gonna stay in the S tier. Alright, let's just rank a few more frequently used units here. Let's go Hades. So last time I ranked Hades in the S tier, and I still believe he belongs in the S tier because of how useful he is in places such as Legend Quest as well as the Labyrinth. Just having him in your lineup is like having a wall of 1 million HP ready to be deployed. It's almost like having a boss in your lineup, and that just feels freaking epic. He doesn't even have that shabby of a DPS. In fact, at level 50 he does have around 10k DPS. The multi-hit isn't really a problem since he's meant to be used against enemies who attack not too frequently but deal a lot of damage in a single attack, such as the Behemoth, that kind of enemy which doesn't have a lot of knockback and it can absorb all of these hits. But he is not meant to be used as a means of offense anyway. He's only meant to be a support DPS. But his health is ridiculous. If you invest into him, he will become an absolute impenetrable wall of death, as suggested by his name. So in early game, probably not gonna be as prominent because he will just stand at the front doing seemingly nothing. But in mid game and late game, when you can afford to invest into him, he is a really good tank, especially considering his immunities. Now I do not suggest getting his talents whatsoever, other than of course the health up and maybe attack up. The anti-relic talents are just, why are they even there? Like, he is right up against the enemy, and what is a slow for? So yeah, in summary, he's a great war player. Have him in your lineup if you're unsure of your meat shield's capabilities of tanking a boss rush. He will be there and tank throughout the level. If you're lacking defensive units in say Merciless XP, then he is a great option, along with of course our Turtle Man. Where are you, King Gamorreon? Now with the recent updates, King Gamorreon has reached a new level of defense. He has just reached, what, 4 million HP against Blacks and Angels with a couple of resist up and defense up combos. He's able to reach an uncanny amount of HP against Blacks and Angels to the point where he can just stand in the Angelic Cyclone as well as a Black Cyclone and just not move. Like, combine him with a collab unit like Juven's, and what do the Angels do against you? They can't do anything. So yeah, very good meat shield. Borderline in the A tier. I really want to put him in the S tier, but I'm gonna have to wait for his ultra talents to come out. If his HP raises even more, then of course, next to Hades, big HP wars. But other than that, he's gonna have to stay at the front of A tier for now. Strike in Array, I just used it in the Labyrinth. Absolutely destroyed that Bonbon, which I thought was gonna be the main threat of the level. So just like Pai, she is the go-to unit for floating enemies because, well, she's the main star of floating busters or air busters, if I'm getting the name right. A very good unit across all stages of the game. Maybe does fall off a bit in late game due to the presence of Curse, which also applies to our best girl Pai here. Where is Pai? Pai is another very solid S tier Uber. In fact, let's just move her next to Lilin to show their dominance in their respective fields. So both of them absolutely destroyed their target. And Pai's attack animation, oh, you don't see anything similar. I mean, who else holds a hammer in this game? Maxima Fighter? That is a weak hammer compared to Pai's. Pai is like a full-on atomic smash. Earlier today when I was in the Labyrinth, she one-shotted that Professor A and that felt awesome. So I'm gonna keep her in the S tier, probably forever. Of course, we also have Series in the S tier. Now she doesn't have that offensive capability that Ray and Pai do, but she has a really short cooldown for what she does. Now she is a support DPS, but given her strong against all traits, she is just like a more spammable version of Gal. Now I know the two are not directly comparable, but hey, for the sake of explaining, she is a multi-hit version of Gal. Just like Gal, she's strong against all traits, but she does have a lot more immunities, as well as of course what I just mentioned, a very short cooldown. So that does set her above Gal. She is a secondary DPS of course, don't expect her to one-shot boss enemies, but she is a really good support unit to have in your lineup. Okay, let's now rank Garu. Garu should still belong in the A tier, I reckon, because despite being one of the worst Fest exclusives, he is still a Fest exclusive, and he does have Zombie Killer with 7k DPS, as well as resistant versus all traits. Now I know Curse does make him practically useless, but without Curse, he is a very solid A tier Uber in early game and mid game. Very solid defensive option against zombies, especially long range zombie. An example will be stages with Zamel, who is a zombie with 600 range that will just keep on pecking at your attackers from far away. Now Garu is the one who can just steadily approach the target and absolutely eliminate them. So that's why he's in the A tier. Similarly, Dark Garu belongs also in the A tier. Now unlike regular Garu, he doesn't have as much usage defensively wise, but he does have some pretty good DPS when strengthened, so use him as a half generalist. Of course, he is gonna be outstanding in traitless stages, so use him as a alternative form of DPS when you don't have any of these above. Now you practically stop using Garu and Daru in late game. Yeah, they're just gonna be in the bottom of A tier for now. And let's just get all of the busters out of the way before we conclude this video. Sacred Blade Sakura, very solid anti-metal debuffer, also belongs in A tier because, well, metal isn't exactly that niche of a trait anymore, especially with the introduction of the super talents of Ice Cat, which gives her a really good debuff uptime against metals. Yeah, she's gonna be an amazing metal debuffer from now on, and I'm talking about Ice Cat. Sakura is still very good with 100% metal debuff rate. With double debuff against metals, she is one of the best metal debuffers in the game. Except she is slightly overtaken by the ones who can freeze, such as Poseidon. Poseidon also belongs right in the A tier because of the niche he has. Poseidon can also freeze zombies, of course, which just makes him even more useful. Now in early game, he's not gonna do much. In fact, he and Sakura, both of them are gonna be pretty much useless in early game. Maybe a bit of usage for Poseidon, but not Sakura, no. Sakura's usage is gonna be shown in mid game, where you face some decently beefy metal enemies such as Metal Seal, infamous stages such as Parade of the Dead. So yeah, that's where you're gonna be using these kind of units. And while we're at it, Ice Cat, straight up in the A tier because of her ultra talent. Think of her as a uber version of Apple Cat with 100% freeze versus red, of course. But with that ultra talent, if you're willing to invest into her in late game, she is gonna be an incredible metal debuffer. Wait for that metal baron to be introduced and watch her freeze the baron. She is just there because of how niche her freeze talent is. So let's rank a couple of Lugas that we've ranked last time before we conclude part 1 of the tier list. Of course, we still have a bunch of regular Ubers to rank. There's just simply not enough time in one video to go through them all. With the recent addition of Zero Legends, a lot of things are still subject to debate. Depending on how late game evolves, units will also evolve in the tier list positions. So we're just gonna quickly rank Luga here as an A tier debuffer in early game and mid game, and in end game actually because of how much range he has. Of course he gets outclassed by Cyberpunk, but should I put him in A tier or B tier? I'm gonna put him in B tier, unfortunately, very front of B tier. He is a very good debuff option if you don't have anything else to slow down your enemies, but otherwise I say Cyberpunk outdoes him in pretty much every area. Next up we have Pico Luga, very solid freeze unit. I say I put him in the A tier section. Now he's just very niche. Like, he can freeze from a very long range away, which can sometimes just be the only way to freeze the enemy. For example, you're fighting against the Aku phase advanced stage and you need to freeze the boss somehow. He is the only way you're gonna be able to do it within that stage because of how ridiculously long the boss's attack is. I mean, the boss can reach all the way up to 800 range with his long range attack, so if you need something to freeze him and meanwhile deal that fatal blow via something like Balrog, or maybe you just want to slip in an extra slime cat, he is the one who's gonna allow you to do it. So that's why Piccolan is getting put into the A tier. And being above Asaluga, he does have a more unique niche that is less likely to be replaced. Let's rank our new unit, Dark Phono, or King of Misfortune Phono. Now, where I've just placed him is not a mouse slip. He does belong in the S tier, not the meta tier. Having just seen his multiple mini surges, I mean, that's one of the coolest abilities ever in this game. I don't think any other unit has multiple surges. Character design, 9 out of 10. Now the -1 is coming from his face, which is a bit too edgy in my opinion. But hey, you may like him. He just looks a bit too similar to Sonic the Hedgehog, don't you think? Personal rant aside, his ability was slightly disappointing. I mean, 2 seconds slow versus all traits, that sounds amazing, right? But in practice, it is only up to about 33% uptime, which compared to Mitama is just not even close. So I did a bit of math, and if you manage to somehow land every single hit, including the last surge, you will get 90% uptime, which I know is very surprising. But again, in practice, you are not going to get that many amount of hits with Phono here. So unless you're going for that double medium slow up combo, he is not going to be that good of a debuffer. But debuffing aside, he is a very good source of DPS. Now, another major reason why I put him in the S tier, not the meta tier, is because his range falls short of 501, and that is the range of course, our most hated enemy, Professor A. If only his range had been increased by 50, I would have 100% put him in the meta tier, but unfortunately he can't even outrange Professor A, and that is absolutely depressing. I mean, our OG Phono here is gonna be taking care of that foe, so it's best to have both of them around, I guess, just for an absolute 11 out of 10 on style. To summarize his usage, absolutely the same across early game, mid game, late game. The DPS is really good for the amount of range he has, but the chances of all 3 hits connecting is abysmally low. Even though all 3 hits overlap with 60 range, if you look at it, he only has 10 inner range, which is the exact same as King Phono's here. So it doesn't actually make him more usable, because in most of the situations, what you want is to be able to hit the enemies have entered within your range rather than outside your range, especially by such a small pocket of only 50. So that extra 50 range is not gonna help unless it becomes his inner range. Okay, the keyword here is inner range. Just like the situation with our friend Gaia here, the single biggest issue Gaia has is her low inner range, and that is what makes her really difficult to use. So the same story goes for both Phonos. Obviously this Phono does have potential to hit more enemies with all 3 of his attacks, but that's not gonna happen so likely within 50 extra range. I mean, who are you gonna reach? So yeah, that concludes part 1 of the new updated tier list. See you again in about a week or two.